So now that we have, for the most part, just about everything we need in place for, say, our firearms, so our shooting, our equipping, our unequipping, all that, or sorry, not our shooting, our aiming, we want to start working on our actual shooting ability and shooting logic. So to begin, I want to go ahead and actually remove the logs from the previous video. So the activate aiming ability, it's no longer needed. And equipment component, I don't think we have any more, which we do not, so we are good to go there. So what I want to do is I want to first start working on the actual logic of the firearm. So specifically, I want to go ahead and create under the firearm folder a new Unreal class. It's going to be an actor component, and we're going to call this one the Firearm Logic Component. So basically, our shooting and reloading logic are going to be self-contained and replicated inside of this basically inside of this logic component. So let's go ahead and remove tick. Set can never tick to false. And remove the tick implementation and the remaining comments like so. Okay, so to begin, we need to kind of think about how we are going to implement the actual shooting portion. So how do we keep track of, how we shoot? The way we're going to do that is through a very simple structure. And that structure is basically just going to keep track of kind of how we would in real life. So when you press the trigger and when you release the trigger. So if you're in semi-auto, you press the trigger, so you increment, that's going to be an integer. You increment that so it's greater than the release trigger count. You shoot one shot, and that's it. If you're in full auto and you press the trigger, which is now greater than the release trigger, you start shooting, and you're going to continue to shoot in a loop until you release the trigger, which increments the trigger released count. So this is going to look something kind of like this. So we're going to have a ustruct. We don't need to make it a blueprint type. We're going to do struct, and let's call it f trigger pressed released. We can do states, or we'll do counts. Yeah, count. Then we're going to have a generated body and a u property inside it. So this is going to be we could do a uint8. I'd imagine it has the ability to grow quite fast beyond that. And I don't think you can I don't know. I don't think you can replicate a uint 16 or 32 or anything, but let's just try it. So this is going to be the trigger pressed count, which will be 0 by default. And I want to go ahead and try to compile just to see if it even, allows the unsigned integer types that are, not a byte. Okay, so it seems to. So that's good there. So let me think really quick. All right, so I had to do a quick Google search, but basically a uint 16 should allow us to go from basically all the way up to 65, well, a little more than 65,000, which should be plenty for our use case. So unless someone is spamming, the trigger constantly, so the pressed and released, you're going to end up, I can't imagine anyone even coming close to that amount of, times they press and release the trigger, because this is also going to be specific per firearm. So players are also going to be switching out the firearm, pretty regularly. So that's another thing. So now we have the trigger released count, and we're going to have this as a replicated property. So let's make a protected section, have a u property. It's going to be replicated using equals onRep underscore trigger count. So, f trigger press release count, trigger count. Now we can have a u function, void onRep trigger count. And we also need the get lifetime replicated props as well. So let's make that definition And let's make the onRep for the trigger count. So again, we need to include the Unreal Network. So include net Unreal Network. And because we're using the push model, net core push model, dang nabbit, autocorrect, push model dot h, and it did it again. So I need to go ahead and fix that include. Anyways, that was a typo. So push model.h. There we go. Okay, so we want to replicate the trigger count. So do rep lifetime with params fast. It's going to be u FirearmLogicComponent for the class. Nailed it. FirearmLogicComponent. Then the variable, which is going to be the trigger count. And then our params, which we need to make. So f do rep lifetime params. We're going to do params dot b is pushed based equals true. So that'll handle our trigger, basically count replication stuff. And now we simply want functions to press and release the trigger. So void press trigger and void release trigger. Now these are what's going to be called from our fire ability. So we can go ahead and create the definitions. And I want to move the onRep on top. It's just an order thing that I personally prefer to use. So on press trigger, we want to take our trigger count, the trigger press count, and we simply increment it. Then if we have authority, which we need to make that function again. So let's go up here, do bool has authority, const return get owner role equals authority. So if this is true, we have authority. If it's false, we don't. So if we have authority, we want to mark property dirty from name. Then the class name is FirearmLogicComponent. Then the property name is the trigger count. And then the object is this. And from here, we can call the onRep trigger count. So that way, in the case of the server, it's going to automatically just make our way here. So now once we have that, we can go ahead and copy this logic and paste it into release trigger. However, there's one caveat. We want to do a check. So if trigger count dot trigger pressed count is greater than the trigger count dot released count, then we want to increment the trigger released count. So this way we don't end up with cases where we, for example, have some weird issue. I mean, I've just had this in the past in other projects to where we kind of get these out of sync to where, we can't really, I guess you could say the release can't really catch up to the pressed count, so to speak. So once we have that logic, we are pretty much good to go, because inside of here, we're basically going to check and see if the trigger press count is greater than the release count, then that means we are wanting to shoot. So we are shooting. If it is, less than, for example, or equal to the release count, then we are not shooting. So if trigger pressed count is greater than the trigger released count, we know we are shooting. So we want to shoot. Otherwise, we want to stop shooting. So this will be in the case of, say, full auto. So in the case of semi-auto, it doesn't really matter. This isn't, honestly going to do anything. But this component here will pretty much cover the whole concept of semi-auto and full auto regardless. So it's not really a concern. Anyways, we kind of have the basis laid out for what we want. The only thing we want to do now is go ahead and create the actual fire ability. So under our abilities, let's add a new Unreal class. It's going to be a input gameplay ability. and we'll call it gameplay ability underscore fire. Press OK. And kind of the same thing that we did with aim. We want a protected section. We want a constructor. And let's go ahead and override activate ability and end ability. So let's go ahead, create definitions for all three. Clean it up a bit. And for our constructor, we need a input tag. So input tag is going to equal something we don't have yet. So let's go ahead and include data tags ability input tags.h and go to it. So duplicate our aim, and we want it to be fire. Likewise, press or go to the .cpp and do the exact same thing. So make the fire gameplay tag, and it'll be ability.input.fire. So in our gameplay ability fire, we have tag underscore ability underscore input underscore fire as our input tag that will go ahead and trigger this ability. So we're not going to get too in the weeds yet. We're going to go ahead and kind of finish out the remainder of this. It's getting late for me. It's about 1 a.m. So I'm going to end up finishing this probably tomorrow. But we at least have kind of the foundation laid out. So I'm going to go ahead and build just to make sure everything is good to go. And yeah, let's just make sure. Which, as you can see, it is not. It is from the mark property dirty, which is related to the push model. So we are in the weapon module. So let's load up the build.cs. And as you can see, I forgot to add net core. So let's add that as a dependency, rebuild, and make sure we are good to go. Okay, so everything built just fine, which means we are, pretty much ready to continue. So that is going to wrap up this video, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description below, where you can also get early access to this entire series.